My people do not need promises. They need fields to feed their children and schools to shape their dreams. I am no hero, just a son of this soil, working to give my nation the dignity it deserves.
On July 27, 2025, in the tranquil heart of Oslo, Norway, a moment unfolded that would redefine the global narrative on peace. The Norwegian Nobel Committee, custodians of the world's most hallowed accolade, announced their shortlist for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Among the 5 names read aloud, one ignited a firestorm of awe, debate, and hope. Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old interim president of Burkina Faso. This was no mere nomination. It was a clarion call, a challenge to the very foundations of how the world perceives leadership, governance, and peace in the 21st century. Traoré, a soldier who seized power in a military coup in September 2022, stood not as a politician molded by elite institutions or a diplomat polished by global summits, but as a man of the soil, a leader whose vision of peace was rooted in the sweat of farmers, the dreams of children, and the resilience of a nation long relegated to the margins. His name spoken in the austere halls of Oslo sent ripples from the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to the corridors of power in Paris, Washington, and beyond, demanding a reckoning with what peace truly means in an era of fracture and flux. The announcement was electric in the minimalist elegance of the Nobel Institute. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised as the committee's chair uttered Traoré's name. Diplomats exchanged glances, their whispers mingling with the weight of history. A young African leader barely in his 4th decade from a nation ranked among the world's poorest was now a contender for an honor synonymous with the legacies of Nelson Mandela, Malala Yousafzai, and Martin Luther King Jr. Traoré's journey, from a village boy to a global symbol, was a testament to the power of conviction over convention, action over rhetoric, and hope over despair. This is the epic tale of Ibrahim Traoré, the farmer in uniform who turned battlegrounds into farmlands, despair into dignity, and a nation's struggle into a beacon for the world. Ibrahim Traoré was born in 1988 in a small village in Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation in the arid expanse of West Africa's Sahel region. His childhood was etched by the relentless realities of poverty. The sun beat down on cracked earth. Electricity was a rare visitor, and hunger was a constant companion. Yet within this crucible of hardship, Traoré's spirit was forged. His parents, subsistence farmers who wrested life from unforgiving soil, instilled in him a reverence for the land and a fierce sense of duty. "The earth is our mother," his mother would say, her hands calloused from years of toil. "Treat her with respect, and she will provide." Those words became the bedrock of Traoré's life, shaping a boy who saw not limitations but possibilities in the dust beneath his feet. The military was Traoré's path to opportunity. In a country where education was a luxury, the army offered structure, discipline, and a chance to rise. He joined not for power, but for purpose. Driven by a desire to serve a nation he saw slipping into chaos. By his early 30s, he had earned a reputation as a captain of unwavering integrity, respected by his soldiers for his fairness and by his superiors for his resolve. But as he climbed the ranks, he witnessed a nation unraveling. Burkina Faso was bleeding. Insurgent groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State ravaged the northern and eastern regions, displacing over 2 million people and leaving a trail of death and destruction. The government led by President Christian Caboret seemed impotent, unable to stem the violence or address the deeper wounds of poverty, corruption, and exploitation by foreign powers. By September 2022, the situation was untenable. Multinational corporations controlled vast swaths of Burkina Faso's farmland, exporting profits while locals starved. Foreign aid, often laden with exploitative conditions, offered no real salvation. For Traoré and a cadre of young officers, the breaking point had come. On September 29, 2022, they staged a bloodless coup, ousting Caboret and naming Traoré interim president at the age of 34. The world recoiled. Military coups were seen as anathema to democracy, relics of a darker era. The African Union suspended Burkina Faso's membership, and Western capitals issued stern condemnations. But Traoré stood resolute. In his first address to the nation, delivered in a simple military uniform, he spoke not of conquest but of creation. "We did not come to rule," he declared, his voice steady as the Sahel winds. "We came to rebuild." Those words, raw and unadorned, marked the dawn of a revolution unlike any other. A revolution not of ideology or power, but of labor, unity, and truth. Traoré's vision for Burkina Faso was as audacious as it was elemental. Peace through self-reliance. In an age of performative diplomacy and hollow promises, he chose the ancient virtues of work, sacrifice, and community. His battlefield was not the war-torn north, but the hunger that plagued every village, the ignorance that dimmed young minds, and the despair that crushed the human spirit. His weapons were not guns, but schools, clinics, and seeds. Within months of taking power, Traoré unleashed a torrent of reforms that would transform Burkina Faso and send shockwaves across Africa and the world. The insurgency that had torn Burkina Faso apart was Traoré's first challenge. Rather than escalating the cycle of violence, he chose a path of radical reconciliation. Over 12,000 former militants, men and women who had once fought under banners of terror, were welcomed back into society through community dialogues, vocational training, and resettlement programs. Traoré worked tirelessly with local leaders, from village elders to religious figures, to create spaces where former fighters could lay down their weapons and pick up tools. Carpenters, farmers, and artisans emerged from the ashes of conflict, their hands now building rather than destroying. On May 4th, 2025, Traoré took this vision further, pardoning 1,100 former militants and enrolling them in the Farmers of Peace program. This initiative, hailed by the United Nations as a global model for post-conflict reconciliation, turned battlegrounds into fertile fields. In villages along the Nakenby River, men who once manned checkpoints now operated irrigation pumps, their overalls emblazoned with the words, "Farmers of Peace." The impact was staggering. Terror attacks dropped by 70%, and communities once divided by fear began to heal. In the town of Kaya, a former militant named Musa Zongo spoke for many when he said, "I fought because I had nothing. Traoré gave me a purpose, a field, a future, a home." This approach was not without risk. Reconciliation required trust in a nation scarred by betrayal, courage in a region where vengeance was the norm. But Traoré's conviction was unshakable. "These are not enemies," he said. "They are our brothers and sisters led astray by despair. Our duty is to bring them back to the light." His words resonated not just in Burkina Faso, but across the Sahel, where similar conflicts had left deep wounds. The Farmers of Peace program became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of second chances and the possibility of peace forged through unity rather than division. Perhaps Traoré's boldest move was a reclamation of 3.8 million hectares of farmland from foreign corporations. For decades, multinational agribusinesses had dominated Burkina Faso's fertile plains, extracting wealth while local farmers languished in poverty. In a single defiant act, Traoré's government nationalized key agricultural assets and redistributed the land to smallholder farmers. "The land is not for sale," he declared, echoing the revolutionary spirit of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's iconic leader. "It belongs to those who work it, who love it, who live by it." This act of economic sovereignty sent shockwaves through global markets. Farmers, now empowered with land, seeds, and tools, began cultivating maize, sorghum, and millet, transforming rural economies. In the village of Pisala, a farmer named Fatimata Ouedraogo described the change. "Before Traoré, we were tenants on our own land, begging for scraps. Now we grow our own food, and our children no longer go to bed hungry." Markets overflowed with locally grown produce, and food insecurity, one of daily reality, began to recede. The move also struck a blow against Burkina Faso's dependence on foreign aid, signaling to the world that the nation would forge its own path. The reclamation of land was more than an economic policy. It was a cultural and spiritual rebirth. Farmers long marginalized stood taller, their hands reclaiming not just the soil, but their dignity. In the town of Gorom Gorom, a market vendor named Issa Diallo, said, "When Traore gave us back the land, he gave us back our pride. We are no longer beggars. We are builders." The ripple effects were profound. Local economies flourished, rural communities thrived, and Burkina Faso began to rewrite its story as a nation of resilience and self-determination. Traoré's vision extended far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The Sahel, a region ravaged by desertification and climate change, became the canvas for one of his most ambitious projects, the Sahel Life Alliance. In partnership with Mali and Niger, Traoré led a regional coalition to plant 800 million trees across the arid landscape, transforming barren wastelands into green corridors of hope. The initiative created thousands of jobs, restored degraded ecosystems, and fostered a sense of solidarity among nations long divided by conflict and scarcity. Environmentalists hailed the Sahel Life Alliance as a triumph of climate justice, a model for how even the poorest regions could combat environmental collapse. Scientists marveled at the scale of the reforestation effort, which slowed desertification and mitigated the impacts of climate change. In the village of Tateo, women who once trekked miles for firewood now tended saplings, their hands nurturing life where only dust had rained. "We are not just planting trees," Traoré said. "We are planting the seeds of a future where our children can breathe, where our land can live." The alliance became a global symbol of what collective action could achieve, a beacon of hope in a world grappling with ecological crisis. The Sahel Life Alliance was also a diplomatic triumph. For decades, the Sahel had been a battleground for foreign interests, from colonial powers to modern-day corporations. Traoré's coalition turned that battleground into a shared mission, uniting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in a common cause. The initiative drew praise from unexpected quarters, with even skeptical Western leaders acknowledging its impact. The Sahel Life Alliance is a reminder that solutions to global challenges can come from the places least expected, said a UN climate official. For Traoré, it was simply a matter of survival. A nation without a healthy environment is a nation without a future. We are fighting for our lives. Traoré understood that peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of opportunity, dignity, and hope. His government slashed bureaucratic spending by 60%, redirecting funds to the twin pillars of education and healthcare. In just 18 months, Burkina Faso built 2,400 new schools and 700 healthcare centers, a feat that stunned the region and drew admiration from development experts worldwide. Classrooms sprang up in villages where children had once studied under trees, their lessons interrupted by rain or heat. Clinics brought life-saving care to communities long neglected, their shelves stocked with medicine, and their doors open to all. Traoré's commitment to nutrition was a cornerstone of his education reforms. He ensured that 95% of rural primary school children received free lunches made from locally grown food, boosting attendance and academic performance while supporting local farmers. In the village of Banfora, a teacher named Aminata Konate described the transformation. "My students used to come to school with empty stomachs, their eyes dull with hunger. Now they eat, they laugh, they dream." Traoré has given them a reason to hope. The program created a virtuous cycle, strengthening both education and agriculture as farmers found new markets for their crops. Healthcare too saw unprecedented progress. Maternal mortality rates plummeted, and preventable diseases like malaria became less deadly as clinics reached remote areas. In the village of Nuna, a mother named Fatimata Diallo spoke of the change. "I used to pray my children would survive the night. Now I take them to a clinic just down the road, and I know they will live." The speed and scale of these reforms were staggering, a testament to Traoré's ability to translate vision into action. "We are not building for awards," he said. "We are building for our people, for their dignity, for their future." The Farmers of Peace program, launched in May 2025, was perhaps Traoré's most visionary initiative. By pardoning 1,100 former militants and integrating them into agricultural communities, he turned the very agents of conflict into architects of renewal. The program provided training, tools, and land to former fighters, enabling them to become productive citizens. In villages across Burkina Faso, men and women who once carried rifles now carried hoes, their work irrigating fields and rebuilding trust. The United Nations hailed the program as a global model, with a senior official stating, "Traore has shown the world that peace is not won with weapons, but with opportunity." The program's impact was felt far beyond Burkina Faso. In Mali and Niger, similar initiatives began to take root, inspired by Traoré's success. In the town of Djibo, a former militant named Issouf described his transformation. "I fought because I had no hope. Traoré gave me a field, a purpose, a family. Now I fight for peace." The program was not just about rehabilitation. It was about redefining what it means to be a citizen, to belong to a community, to contribute to a nation's future. Each seedling planted in the Farmers of Peace fields carried a tag with the words Liberté, Travail, Dignite, freedom, work, dignity, that encapsulated Traoré's vision. On July 1st, 2025, during the Feast of All Saints, an unexpected voice joined the chorus of praise for Traoré. Pope Leo XIV, a pontiff renowned for his unwavering commitment to social justice, spoke from the heart of the Vatican with words that carried the weight of centuries. "When I pray for peace," he said, "I see the face of a young soldier from Burkina Faso. He does not preach through laws or scriptures, but through the toil of his hands and compassion of his heart. He has never walked the churches of Rome, yet he treats the world's poor as his sanctuary." The Vatican's formal nomination of Traoré for the Nobel Peace Prize was a historic moment, unprecedented in its audacity. Never before had the Holy See endorsed a sitting African leader, let alone one who had risen through a military coup. The endorsement framed Traoré's leadership as a moral and spiritual crusade, a challenge to the world's obsession with power and prestige. It shifted the global discourse from the abstract rhetoric of diplomacy to the tangible reality of peace built through action. In Rome, the Pope's words were met with reverence and debate, with some Vatican scholars calling it a redefinition of redemption for a leader born of conflict. The papal endorsement sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. In Paris, President and Lucie Moreau, navigating France's complex colonial legacy, offered measured praise. "We may not agree with Mr. Traoré's methods, but his results demand our respect. He is writing a new chapter in Africa's story, one of action rather than promises." In Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Janet R. Collins was more cautious, noting that Traoré's work prompts us to rethink what peace means in the 21st century. Brazil's President Luiz G. Costa was unreserved, calling Traoré the new Sankara, a farmer in uniform who plants hope where others sow division. In Moscow, the Russian president praised Traoré's pragmatism, stating, "He builds not ideologies, but systems, food, schools, belief." The Vatican's endorsement was more than symbolic. It was a call to the world to recognize a new kind of leadership. Traoré, a soldier who had never set foot in the grand cathedrals of Europe, was being hailed as a moral force, a man whose actions spoke louder than any sermon. The endorsement elevated him from a regional actor to a global symbol, forcing the world to confront its assumptions about power, redemption, and the meaning of peace in a century defined by crisis. In Burkina Faso, the news of Traoré's Nobel nomination unleashed a tidal wave of pride and celebration. In Ouagadougou, the capital, tens of thousands gathered under the glow of homemade lanterns, their voices rising in a chorus of "Ibrahim, Ibrahim." Street vendors sold cups of bissap and roasted peanuts, while drummers pounded rhythms older than the colonial statues that dotted the city. A hand-painted banner stretched between two acacia trees declared, "We no longer beg, the world now listens." Radio stations crackled with callers shouting, a cry of triumph that echoed through the night. Mothers wept openly, not from sorrow, but from the relief of knowing their children now attended schools Traoré had built, safe from the gunfire that once haunted their dreams. The celebration was not confined to Burkina Faso. Across the Sahel, in Niamey and Bamako, youth collectives projected videos of Traoré onto public walls, chanting, "One Sahel, one dream." In Lagos, the student activist tweeted, Traore didn't chase awards in Davos. He chased harvests in the fields. That's why this Nobel matters. In Johannesburg, university students organized an art exhibit titled Fields of Peace, showcasing paintings, installations, and poetry inspired by Traoré's agricultural revolution. Pan-African media called the nomination a reckoning, a rejection of the old global order, and a bold redefinition of Africa's place in the world. In villages along the Nakenbe River, former militants, now clad in overalls labeled Farmers of Peace, worked side by side with locals, irrigating maize fields and rebuilding trust. In the town of Dori, a mother named Isa Soadogo spoke for many when she said, My son used to fear the night. Now he sleeps soundly knowing there are schools to go to and fields to tend. The nomination was more than an accolade. It was a validation of a people's resilience, a recognition that a nation once dismissed as a footnote could lead the world in redefining peace. The celebration spread beyond the Sahel, igniting a Pan-African movement. In Accra, students held vigils, their candles flickering in the night as they discussed Traoré's model of self-reliance. In Kinshasa, youth collectives organized forums debating how his reforms could inspire their own nations. On social media, the hashtag Nobel for Africa trended globally with young Africans demanding recognition for leaders who worked the land rather than the lecture circuit. In Nairobi, a journalist wrote, Traore has shown us that peace is not a gift from the West. It is a harvest we grow ourselves. On July 28, 2025, just one day after the Nobel announcement, the leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood together in Ouagadougou for a historic press conference. Their joint declaration was a manifesto of defiance and hope, framing Traoré's nomination as not the glory of one man, but the triumph of a continent. They announced the creation of the Joint Civil Command of the Sahel, a new institution to coordinate regional efforts in food security, post-conflict resettlement, and rural health care. The declaration was a bold statement of intent. Africa would no longer be defined by the narratives of others, but by the actions of its own people. Neighboring nations like Guinea, Chad, and Togo sent official congratulations, signaling that Traoré's model of self-reliance and regional solidarity could become a blueprint for African development. Within the African Union, the nomination sparked a fierce debate. Delegates questioned the organization's policy of isolating governments born of military coups, with one commissioner stating anonymously, "We cannot judge leaders by how they rise to power. We must judge them by the roads, schools, and clinics they build." The debate reached a crescendo when several AU members called for a revision of the rapid response mechanism, arguing that Traoré's result demanded a new approach to governance. Even in Europe and the United States, diplomats began to acknowledge Traoré's growing legitimacy. While concerns over democratic norms persisted, several envoys expressed respect for Burkina Faso's sovereign path. Quietly, some international lenders reopened communication channels with Ouagadougou, a stark reversal from months earlier when Traoré had severed ties with the IMF. The move was a tacit admission that his model, rejecting foreign debt, nationalizing resources, and prioritizing local solutions, was not just viable, but transformative. Traoré's nomination was more than a personal honor. It was a mirror held up to the world's contradictions. For too long, Africa had been a chessboard for foreign interests. Its resources plundered, its people patronized. Traoré turned that chessboard into a canvas for self-determination. His rejection of IMF loans, his nationalization of food policy, and his ban on foreign mining firms posed a quiet but profound challenge to the global economic order. Yet his results were undeniable. Terror attacks down, farm yields up, clinics open, children fed. In villages across Burkina Faso, neighbors once divided by ethnicity now planted saplings together, each seedling tagged with the words Liberté Dignite. The nomination forced the world to grapple with profound questions. What is peace in an era of climate crisis, economic inequality, and geopolitical strife? Is it the absence of war or the presence of justice, opportunity, and self-reliance? Traoré, a farmer in uniform, showed that true power lies not in armies or wealth, but in the hands of those who till the soil, teach the young, and heal the sick. His story was a call to redefine leadership, not as a product of elite credentials or global approval, but as a commitment to the common good. The global response was a mix of admiration and unease. In France, Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler, President and Lucy Moreau's cautious praise reflected a nation grappling with its past. Traoré's methods may unsettle us, she said, but his achievements compel us to listen. In the United States, Secretary of State Janet R. Collins spoke of an opportunity to rethink peace, her words masking a deeper discomfort with Traoré's rejection of Western economic models. Brazil's President Luiz G. Costa was more direct, calling Traoré a farmer who corrected me when I compared him to Sankara. He said, "I'm no hero. I'm just a man who works the land." That's when I knew he deserved the Nobel. In Moscow, the Russian president praised Traoré's pragmatism, noting he builds not ideologies but systems, food, education, hope. The reactions were not mere commentary. They reflected a shifting geopolitical reality. For decades, Africa had been a battleground for foreign interests. Traoré turned that battleground into farmland, classrooms, and clinics, forcing even his critics to take notice. His nomination was a symbolic turning point, a declaration that Africa was no longer speaking with borrowed voices, but with the strength of its own actions. As December 10th, 2025 approaches, the world waits with bated breath to see if Ibrahim Traoré will become the first sitting African head of state to win the Nobel Peace Prize. If awarded, he would also be the first leader honored despite rising through a military transition, a global symbol of what some are calling practical peace. Peace not negotiated in hotel ballrooms, but sown in fields, built in schools, and nurtured in communities. But the outcome in Oslo is almost secondary to the transformation Traoré has already sparked. In Ouagadougou, as night falls, the city refuses to sleep. The chants of Ibrahim Traoré echo through the streets, carried by the rhythm of drums and the pulse of a nation reborn. Vendors sell bissap and roasted peanuts, their smiles as bright as the lanterns overhead. A banner stretched between acacia trees reads, "We no longer beg, now the world comes to us." Across the Sahel, youth collectives project Traoré's speeches onto public walls, their voices united in a single dream. In Lagos, Accra, and Kinshasa, students hold forums and vigils, their hashtags trending globally as they demand recognition for a leader who works the land rather than the lecture circuit. Whatever happens in Oslo, one truth is certain. Ibrahim Traoré has already won. He has won the hearts of his people, the respect of his continent, and the attention of a world that can no longer ignore the power of peace rooted in justice, dignity, and the land. His story is not just a candidacy for a prize. It is a mirror to the contradictions of our time, a reminder that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of hope, sown one seed at a time.